Hey guys, here we are on Chapter 11, the urinary system. As you can see from the image below, we've got a healthy kidney on one side and a very unhealthy kidney on the other side. So let's spend some time just understanding the anatomy of kidneys to start with. So when we think about the organs of the urinary system, we have two kidneys, which are bean-shaped. They're about the size of your fist, and these are what actually form your urine. There are two small tubes that carry the urine from the kidneys to the bladder, and these are referred to as ureters. A single bladder, which is extremely expandable and stores the urine until it's expelled from the body. The urethra is a single tube, longer in men than in women, that carries urine from the bladder to the outside of the body. If you look in the diagram we have here, you can see the kidneys on each side of the body. The adrenal glands are located right on top of the kidney. We have blood supply being delivered to the kidneys on both sides. The kidneys themselves are producing and filtering the blood and producing the urine. And then the ureters transport the urine from the kidney down to the bladder. You can see this on both sides. The bladder then stores the urine until it's expelled through the urethra. When we talk about the urinary system, it has several functions. Number one function is excretion of metabolic wastes. This is the filtering of the blood and cleaning it. It's maintenance of the water-salt balance. So even if you have a salty diet one day and a very water-based diet the next day, you don't explode and get really large with the water or shrink up. It maintains that balance. Maintenance of the acid-base balance. Hormone secretions, specifically renin and erythropoietin, and it reabsorbs filtered nutrients as well as synthesizing vitamin D. So let's start just with excretion. It's primarily nitrogenous wastes. Urea is made by the breakdown of amino acids in the liver. This is why if you have a very, very high protein diet and you're taking in more protein than your body needs, it can be quite hard on the kidneys. It can even lead to some dehydration. Uric acid is made by the breakdown of nucleotides. So if you think about DNA, deoxyribonucleic acid, the nucleotides being broken down turn into uric acid. And creatine, which is made by muscle cells from the breakdown of creatine phosphate. When we think about maintenance of the water, salt, and acid-base balance, there are some homeostatic mechanisms that we'll talk about later in the chapter. The water-salt balance helps maintain your blood pressure. You don't want too much water to make the blood pressure too high or too low. And the kidneys excrete hydrogen ions while also absorbing bicarbonate ions. And this acid-base balance helps maintain a blood pH right around 7.4, which is exactly what we want. We also have hormones involved. There's renin, which is secreted by the kidneys, and it allows the adrenal glands to secrete aldosterone. Aldosterone is a very important hormone in helping regulate the water-salt balance. We also have erythropoietin, which is secreted by the kidneys, and it stimulates red blood cell production when blood oxygen gets too low. So think about going to a higher elevation or working out a lot. Erythropoietin would be secreted to help increase blood cell production, allowing you to transport more oxygen. And then number 5 is to reabsorb filtered nutrients and synthesize vitamin D. The urinary system is responsible for reabsorbing nutrients that are filtered out by the kidneys initially, and then it pulls it back into the bloodstream so you don't lose too much. Vitamin D is a molecule that promotes calcium absorption from the digestive tract, and one of the places that it's made is in the kidneys. Now, the urinary bladder is kind of cool. It stores urine and has two key sphincters that keep it closed. One of those sphincters is made of smooth muscle, which you have no conscious control over. Stretch receptors will cause it to dilate. And then, luckily, we have a skeletal muscle sphincter that you do have conscious control over. So even if you get the urge to go to the bathroom, which is that internal smooth muscle sphincter dilating, we have that skeletal muscle that you can clench down to keep you from wetting your pants. The bladder is expandable, and it contains a tremendous amount of muscle, that middle layer of circular fibers of smooth muscle, and then 2 layers of longitudinal smooth muscle. The lining is a transitional epithelium, and because of this, it allows it to expand a lot. Filling activates stretch receptors, which signal to the spinal cord that it's time to go to the bathroom. And here you can see a diagram of those stretch receptors and how they're wired into the spinal cord, causing a reaction that will open the sphincters. Now let's go ahead and look in a little bit more specifically into the urinary system to the kidney. And this is the real workhorse of the filtering of the blood. And it has three key parts to it. The renal cortex, which is that outer layer, the renal medulla, which is an inner portion, and then the renal pelvis, which is a central cavity that is where we collect the urine and has a continuous connection down to the ureter, which then can drain into the bladder. And here we can see that a little bit more clearly. We've got this renal cortex on the outside of the kidney. We have the renal medulla, which is more inside. And then we have the renal pelvis, where you can see the formation of the ureters coming out of this. Some different images. Here's a real kidney where you can kind of see that demarcation between the cortex and the medulla. You can see that renal pelvis here where we've got collection into the ureters. And then you can see this cartoon over here where we can start seeing the workhorses of the kidneys, which are your nephrons, which we'll look at here in just a minute. But I want you to notice the bulk of the nephron is out here in the cortex, but a piece of that nephron dips down into the medulla, comes back up, and then we have a collecting duct that heads down to the renal pelvis. And as we get through the chapter, you'll see the importance of these structures. The nephron itself, which is what we were just looking at, has blood that is delivered to it in this region right here, which we'll break down here in a minute. And then that filtrate that's produced moves through this tube, which is very cleverly wired. It is the microscopic functional unit of the kidney, and this is what produces urine, and there's more than 1 million of these in each kidney. So let's look at the nephron itself. It has what we refer to as a glomerular capsule right here. This is a knot of capillaries. We then have the glomerulus here, sometimes referred to as Bowman's capsule, which then cups around that knot of capillaries. The filtrate is produced here. This is where the blood initially filters out of the bloodstream and into the nephron. And then we have this proximal convoluted tubule, which then goes down to the loop of Henle, which descends into the medulla, comes back up again, and then we have this distal convoluted tubule, which then dumps into the collecting ducts, which then move through the medulla and then down to the renal pelvis, where they can all gather up into the ureter. So we'll talk about this here soon as to how your body uses these nephrons in order to filter the blood. So let's go into each detail. The glomerulus is the knot of capillaries. It puts blood into there, allowing you to create a filtrate. The proximal convoluted tubule has an epithelial layer with a brush border of microvilli, and this is where we start to reabsorb the filtrate. So the good stuff that we want to keep starts to come out of this proximal convoluted tubule, moving back into the bloodstream. We then have the loop of nephron, which is a U-shaped structure. It has a descending limb, which goes down into the medulla, where a lot of water heads back into the bloodstream from here, and an ascending limb that starts pumping salt back out of this filtrate and into the bloodstream again. We then have a distal convoluted tubule. Again, it's made of epithelial cells that have a tremendous amount of mitochondria, so they have a lot of energy. This is important for moving molecules from the blood to the tubule. This is called tubular secretion, and these are things that are really large molecules that couldn't be filtered initially, but your body needs to get rid of. If you take a high dose of antibiotics, this would be where that would be secreted out of your body. And then we have the collecting ducts, which have several nephrons all dumping into these collecting ducts, which is where that urine begins forming, and then it carries it through the ureters out of the renal pelvis towards the bladder. In the next section, we'll look at how nephrons are used to create the filtrate and actually create urine.